This is the Whole Care Network, helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome, everybody. This is A Time to Care the Caregivers podcast, and I'm Isabel Melgarejo, your host. Today, Eve Buck is here with us. She is a licensed therapist, and she's going to be talking about generational trauma. I just have to say that the first conversation that we had, I was fascinated with this topic and so many intricacies that generational trauma has in our lives. Welcome, Eve.
Hi, thank you for having me. As you said, I'm a licensed therapist in the state of Pennsylvania as well as in New York. I've been doing this work for about 5 years now, and it's easy to see in the experiences that I've had how trauma gets passed from generation to generation and what it means for people in their relationships in present day and the way that they navigate the world, the things that they prioritize, so many different impacts of this kind of thing. And so it's valuable to unpack, and I'm excited to chat about it.
Thank you. So how would you define generational trauma?
Obviously it's one of those things that has a lot of different pop psychology definitions, and you see on social media and that sort of thing all the time. It's become a little bit more commonplace. Basic definition is the psychological effects of traumatic experiences that get passed from one generation to another. So meaning someone doesn't have to directly experience something traumatic in order for them to show symptoms or behavioral traits, behaviors in general that are related to what you would typically see from someone who has experienced that kind of trauma. So it's inherited patterns and responses that you learn from the people who raise you, your caregiver, that then manifest in different ways, including often, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder like symptoms, which can be hypervigilance or social anxiety, many, many different things. Difficulty forming relationships, paranoia.
I can think of the Holocaust as a very good example for that, and how a lot of Jews experience the Holocaust, but Jews today that had absolutely nothing to do with that and are descendants of these people that experienced it still feel that trauma from their grandparents or great grandparents. What are other examples of generational trauma that you can think of?
Absolutely. I think the Holocaust is a great example. I'll just say that that's where this idea really originated in the research and within the field, is work with children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, because it's such a specific and extreme traumatic experience that these people went through. So there's a clear path for these children that we can see, through research and noticing patterns and that sort of thing. But this can really come with any type of trauma that you can think of. So that can be chronic traumatic experiences, or even something like an isolated incident that the parent goes through. So a good example might be sexual assault. Mother is raped or sexually assaulted by somebody in her life at any given point, and then we might see a child of that parent express similar reactions that you'd expect of someone who has been sexually assaulted. So more anxiety around strangers or in unfamiliar locations. Nightmares related to sexual trauma even can come up for children who've never experienced it. That sort of thing happens frequently, and it comes from directive parenting from the person who's experienced the trauma. So a parent who's gone through something like that would be rightfully so more cautious, would be telling their children to be more cautious. So it is like the straightforward path to those symptoms, but it also comes from a non-direct kind of subconscious response to the parental behavior, so not even realizing why, for instance, the child develops OCD like behaviors around something like door locking, or and we might just pass over the impact of the generational trauma if you're diagnosing this child and you're saying, okay, they're showing these different symptoms that relate to OCD, so we're going to start treating the OCD, and we start trying to understand, okay, what medication is going to help this child, and how do we help them through exposure therapy to get more comfortable with the things that they're uncomfortable with. But if you ignore the fact that child's mother had a home invasion where she ended up being assaulted, then you're not getting to the root of where the symptoms are coming from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Even if we don't consider it a trauma, we're full of things that we learn from our parents. For me personally, I've never liked gambling. I'm probably afraid of it. Not that anybody cares about that, or
What do you mean? No one cares.
it doesn't have an impact in my life. It's not like I depend on gambling to live or anything.
Gotcha.
But I do remember the story. When I was young, someone in my mom's family used to be a gambler, and this person lost absolutely everything. He went back home and told his family that he had lost the house and that they needed to leave, like, right now. And for me, it was like a traumatic experience. Oh, you can lose absolutely everything. So I've never shown interest in gambling. And I think there's like millions of examples in our lives that shape our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example. And it shows how, you don't, that's what the generational trauma is. You don't have to have this specific experience to react to it. And just like you're saying, I didn't lose everything, but all of a sudden I'm acting as though this behavior could make me lose everything, even though I have no experience with it. And I think that comes in childhood often, or it becomes so much more powerful or impactful in childhood because you're not fully developed. You're not an adult who is able to grapple with the idea of loss of everything and your entire life starting over. As a child, that's too huge to comprehend. And so you develop coping mechanisms to prevent yourself from even getting close to the possibility of having to comprehend that or understand how to deal with it. And that might look like fear, like some kind of specific phobia that presents, or whatever it looks like for the individual. I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine, kind of in this vein that came to mind with what you were saying. She was sharing about her cousin's daughter, who she was talking about. She was an old soul, very autonomous. She's a kid who asks to help with things like the dishes or cleaning up. She makes her bed without being asked. She's just simple and easy. And the example she gave was if we said we were going to go to the park together and then something comes up and the family's not able to go to the park, oftentimes a child, you would expect them to be disappointed or maybe throw a tantrum or not understand why they can't go to the park, not be able to incorporate it and understand it all the way. but this child, her cousin's daughter, can. And she was telling me all of this, and I was thinking, I wonder what her caregiving situation is. So I asked, and she shared that the child's parents actually have both struggled with substance use issues and in and out of real levels of addiction, to the point where she's being cared for by her grandmother with 3 other daughters of different family members who have similar situations. So it wasn't a stable, reliable home life for this girl. So she doesn't have substance use issues, right? The daughter does not, but she exhibits behavior that speaks to someone who is trying very hard to maintain control over her situation, to not overburden her caregivers, because she is adjusting to the circumstances of her experiences with the adults in her life, basically, right? What is at the root of substance use, and the issue that makes it so hard to overcome? It's a lack of control, right? You don't have any control. You have to get the next high, or then you don't have the power over yourself to say no. And this little girl has over identified with control and power in her life, to the point where she's become an adult in a way. She doesn't need to be told to make her bed. She doesn't allow her emotions to overtake her like a what you typically see in children. And while that can be really what we would call like a high functioning mental health response, something that is maybe helpful for you in being effective in your life, okay, so she's clearly responsible, that's going to help her in many aspects of her life as she grows up. It still can be indicative of something that's not very healthy. And in her case, I would imagine it's a real separation from this period of her life, which she's about 10, where she needs to be able to learn how to express her emotions, and through doing it in an out of control way, right? You have the tantrum, so you learn how to express emotions in a healthy way. And if she's never doing that, then at some point we could see some kind of negative reaction, or not negative reaction, but negative outcome for her. Maybe it's a big tantrum at a really inappropriate time, because now she's an adult and you can't throw a tantrum at work, kind of, but it comes out because she hasn't ever learned how to. Maybe it's a breakdown of some sort that could come. So I don't know if that links up with what you're saying in your mind, but it certainly came to my mind.
I guess we all have some kind of trauma that we just carry, and I don't think we're fully aware of the consequences of those things. And you were saying about this girl, and in my mind I was like, well, there can be so many things that could happen. I don't know, I was thinking about eating disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a very good friend, and she was obese for a good chunk of her life, all of her childhood. And on her journey of going to her ideal weight, it included a lot of acceptance for how her mom would treat her. She's very open about it, and one of the things that she would say is that she was eating all of her emotions. So if she was sad, angry, anxious, whatever was wrong in her life, instead of dealing with those emotions, she would eat those emotions.
Do you have a sense of why she felt the need?
From a very young age. And I'm pretty sure that happens with a lot of women everywhere in the world. She started gaining weight, and her mom put her on a diet from a very young age. I don't know how the mom was raised, but I'm pretty sure that the same sentiments that if you're fat, nobody's gonna love you, were there.
Oh, absolutely. That doesn't come out of nowhere, even if it wasn't within her mother's family dynamics growing up, it certainly was much worse societally earlier on, and that has heightened impacts as well. So
Yeah, so how do you start like paying attention to your own traumas and identifying which ones you have? Like what would be a good place to start for people
mhm.
listening to us?
Well, I would first say that it's not always a process that is an upward trajectory all the time. It can often be re-traumatizing. It can bring up symptoms that at times feel worse than whatever you were experiencing before you made the effort. It can be really, really painful, and the that is one of the main reasons I recommend anyone who's trying to understand themselves better, even if they're not looking for what trauma they may have experienced in their life, but just trying to understand why they ended up where they are, what behaviors mean for that, like what their behaviors mean for them, just how they ended up as the person that they are. I would recommend going to therapy, because what that trained therapist can offer you is pacing through this process, which is really important. If you just dive straight into your psyche and try to understand everything about yourself, you might end up with it being in a worse place than where you started, because when you start dismantling some of your coping strategies, everything can flood in, and it can be overwhelming and scary and really hard, and might shut the door for you doing that work again for a very long time. If anyone is interested in trying to understand these things about how their families impact them, I recommend having someone there to help them on the journey, help them take it a step at a time, dip their toes in the water. But you can get started in, like, I think, a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's if you still have a relationship with your family members, having conversations with them can be really impactful. Like, you wouldn't know what is going to come up in your memory from hearing stories about your family life, and what kinds of things your parents dealt with and experienced, or your caregivers dealt with and experienced. So asking questions, being curious. What was childhood like for you, mom? Or what was it like to try to work in a male dominated workforce, grandma? Those kinds of questions can really spark you asking similar things of yourself, and trying to make the links that are important in understanding how trauma impacts you. If you don't have good relationships with your family members, or they're no longer with you for whatever reason, then maybe getting into some journaling can be helpful. There's tons of prompts online for this kind of thing, but asking yourself the question and then reflecting on it and putting word to paper, making it more physical and real, can open up doors that in a safer way than maybe just sitting with it in your own mind and allowing things to spiral. It slows you down when you have to write it out, and have to kind of format it for yourself. So it's always a good place to start if you're trying to do this on your own, I think.
And actually talking with your family members, it's something that I usually recommend in my programs, because that gives a lot of perspective where people are coming from.
Hmm.
And even between siblings, you were raised by the same parents in the same household, and you perceive things completely different because your experiences are different. And I don't know, I guess the way the brain works for each of us is different. I don't know, you're the expert, but
Absolutely. I mean, that's what makes humanity so interesting, and why we create so many unique innovations, and why we evolve so quickly is because the brain is a powerful thing, and it does look different, and it's impacted not only by your physical person, but the experiences that you have.
is there anything else that you would like to share regarding generational trauma, how to manage it? I know that the recommended thing is to go to a specialist who
Mhm.
knows what they're doing. But if there's anything else you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, I think that one thing that might get overlooked with this kind of personal exploration through generational trauma that you don't see when you're talking about trying to understand how your own experiences influence you is the shame that might be associated with carrying behavior, symptom, emotion about something that you didn't personally experience. I think that there's a lot of narrative, at least in the United States culture, of, overcoming your own experiences and whether that means you're strong or weak, and that sort of thing. And so when it comes to saying, oh, I think something that happened to somebody else impacted me, there can be a lot of shame associated with that. You can people might make you feel like, or you might feel as though you don't have a right to claim those things, or you're seeking attention, or you're, whatever the case may be, whatever that narrative in your mind is of saying like, okay, so if we're going back to an earlier example, my parents struggle with addiction, or my parent had experienced sexual assault and now I'm experiencing these things. Doesn't that seem like I'm taking something from them and not dealing with my own experiences? That's a really common response to this kind of work for the individual. And I just like to put it out there and say that it is a real thing. This is documented. The impact of generational trauma oftentimes can lead to more severe symptomology than the person who experienced it in the first place, because the way that the coping mechanisms build up, they're more powerful immediately following a trauma. So oftentimes someone who experiences something extremely traumatic builds these very strong coping mechanisms that block them from it in an extremely powerful way. And therefore, whatever additional symptoms might have come from it, that person doesn't experience. But the coping mechanisms that are so powerful actually lead to negative ramifications for the people that they're caring for in a way that leads to more intense symptomology and reaction. So as you're doing this work, I think it's really important to be kind to yourself, to recognize that you're doing it for yourself and not for anybody else. And no one's opinion on the work that you're doing is important, because you're brave to do it in the first place. And that's something that I believe is important to hold on to.
I think honestly that everybody who's willing to go through therapy and deal with their own emotions and feelings and past or whatever is inside of is brave enough. Majority of people, I don't think, are willing to take those steps because it's scary to just go down the path and deal with your own demons, so to speak.
Absolutely. It's terrifying. And we build up resilience and coping mechanisms in order to not have to do that. So it's a privilege, and it's a really scary thing to break that down. But that's the reach towards self-actualization, if you want to bring, Maslow's hierarchy of needs into it here. It's about being the best version of yourself, and sometimes that means taking away your crutches.
So, where can people find you, talk to you, connect with you?
I have a therapy practice that's based in Philadelphia. It's called Brave Mind Psychotherapy. My office is in Center City, Philadelphia. It's Old City technically, but I also see people virtually, and I'm licensed in the state of New York, Pennsylvania, and recently Massachusetts. So I can do virtual therapy with anyone located in those states. They can find me on my website, which is bravemindpsychotherapy.com, or Psychology Today, which is a therapy directory under my name.
Well, thank you so much for coming. This is a topic that fascinates me because I think even if it's not trauma, I think a good chunk of our lives are dictated by how we perceived everything when we were children. So for me, this is fascinating. And I hope everybody else is fascinated with this, because you have like so much knowledge about this that I just enjoy our conversation so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. It's great talking with you.
Thank you.